another Fight Chat Friday here with Taekwon-Do Coach Academy. We are Adrian Byrne and Richie Ford, and we're all about shining a light on some of the best ITF content, particularly if you're interested from a competitive point of view. If you're a competitor, a coach, you should find something of interest here on this channel. So before we get any bit further, pause this video, hit the subscribe button below, and click that little bell button so that you're part of the conversation whenever we go live, whenever we go talking about anything in the world of ITF competition. So today we're going back to a bit of a classic match from 2013. So it's in the World Championships, and it's between Carl van Roon from New Zealand and Davide Messineo from Italy. And it's really an interesting tactical match. So this one comes courtesy of Olli Leino from Finland, who does an absolutely fantastic job in highlighting ITF Taekwondo competition in particular, and you can find a bunch of his videos on the ITF YouTube channel. So definitely go and check that out. From our point of view, we're looking at this video really just to evaluate the decisions that have been made by both fighters and to see what we can learn from that as it goes on. So Richie, do you want to just introduce the topics today?
Yeah, so today we're going to cover just a couple of things. So one of the interesting points that we will look at is the whole idea of the left stance versus the right leg lead stance. So there's a little bit of a contrast there. And we'll just look at a couple of things there, especially with how that interacts, punching in particular in the foot position, because it's a little bit different in the regular stance. We might see people in a right versus right. So we'll take a look at that. We'll have a look at some parts of counter fighting. So we'll look at timing, setting rhythms, things like that. So we're going to really delve deep into the counter style here in particular and what that means. We're also going to have a little bit of a look at warning control and how that kind of affects this match a little bit, in particular with momentum as well. It's interesting to note that in this particular match, the scoreboard wasn't actually live and visible for the coaches and fighters, so that may have an impact on the match in that point, from that point of view. We'll also take a look at momentum and how momentum swings very quickly in our sport, and in particular how that relates to how the judges score in terms of what's very visible as a score, whether you get two judges scoring a technique for you versus maybe all four corner judges, and as well how that links with warnings and fouls.
Perfect. So let's just jump into round one. We'll just watch out the first round first and have a little bit of commentary after that before jumping into round two. So no further ado, here we go. confusion, I suppose, there over the warning at the end, but that brought the first round to a close and fairly low scoring just in that first round.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of feeling out process. Like obviously these guys are at quite a high level. This was the semi-final of this World Championships.
Yeah.
So Carl had just won the Worlds before in 2011 on home soil in New Zealand. And obviously Davide went on to subsequently win this World. So a battle of two very high level guys, two world champions. So you can see that feeling out process a little bit at the start. And I think especially with Carl's style, it can be quite hard to get a read on that early on. So you can see that kind of impacts on him having the control over the tempo and things like that, particularly in this first round.
Yeah, we'll just have a look at some of the counters there from Carl. And Carl will be well known, I suppose, as a counter fighter. And that was a beautiful way to start it and kind of set your mark as I am champ. You know, you're going to have to come and take it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Like I have to say that's really good here. We spoke about the left versus right stance. Davide actually does a great job of turning his body position. Usually you would see what actually happened would transpire because of poor body positioning and foot positioning, but he actually gets his body turned really, really well. But you see that Carl actually has great head movement there, just slips off that angle and is able to land that backhand very, very nicely. So you see the head movement comes here, and that just takes his head off the straight line and sets himself up really nice. I think it's like a predetermined move. We actually seen this come up a lot in our Fight Chat Friday series here of that backhand actually being something that was like predetermined by fighters, and they almost set themselves up to land it no matter what comes their way. So it's very good. Maybe a little psychological play there as well by Carl to maybe settle down Davide, as you said, to say I'm the world champion here. He kind of just stands over them a little bit. So
he probably has a
as well.
couple of years experience in Davide at this stage, because I think Davide only had been junior 2-3 years before that, so he's probably 21 at that stage. But I quite like as well in this, just from the countering point of view, when we move on, we see the side kick that is done. Carl does something I think is quite interesting in terms of setting a pattern. He's inviting Davide in with that blitz. He knows it's coming. He's seen it before, but he throws that little bit of a show of a hook kick. It's never coming to the body. It's wide. It's showing that there's an opening to go to the hip, and then he brings it back and throws the side kick. And I think it's very much a calculated shot. That's not an accident. He was never going to throw that hook kick in the first place, or the head shot that was coming there. And I think when we were briefly chatting about this earlier, you were saying like this is something that you would see, maybe uniquely from New Zealand and some of the fighters coming out of there. That there's a lot more feints thrown, and there's a lot more preliminary movement used, I think, by a lot of the fighters from New Zealand.
Definitely, especially those ones who are like that counter style. So I know at this particular championships they had a 63 guy as well who was very similar in terms of lots of feints and things like that. So it's definitely comes from that New Zealand style. I think it's a nice way to set up if you want to be a counter fighter, and you can see that little bit of a broken rhythm there with the feint almost lures somebody in to come and attack.
Yeah.
And as you said, definitely like something that was almost pre-planned for Carl there, where he set him up and very nicely scored that side kick.
And then of course you get into that point where we send them away back to the coaches and see what inputs we can have. So let's have a look at how they tackle the second round, and we'll come back together after that for a bit more in-depth discussion. final.
Yeah, so he eventually went on to take that World Championship. So yeah, it was a very good match. I think that the anticipation there of the not having the scores visible was something that we haven't seen in a while back then. So
I think that was the
something
last
different.
championships for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. All the written scorecards and the 2 minutes or so of counting it up and make sure you have it right. But yeah, I think it was, at the time, the kind of anticipation of it is something else. So the round started very much like the previous round finished, and like right from the get go, we had Carl kind of setting some patterns with the kicking, and straight into another side kick score. And I think
Yeah.
as we get into this stage, like if you're looking at the scoreboards, you have to think, right, well, Carl has landed, a very clear backhand counter punch and two pretty good side kicks, and he's going to be feeling himself like he's in a pretty commanding position and fairly comfortable at this stage, I think.
Yeah, I think that Carl early recognises that despite Davide being very good with his legs, that he's starting to favour the hands a little bit more in this particular bout. Even though he goes with the back leg turning kick here, it's almost lowered in by Carl. He almost gives Davide no option but to go for it. But a lot of his Carl now knows that Davide wants to come, so he's just willing to set that distance where he's comfortable and just leave him come. And then whenever Carl is ready, he's ready to fire from there. But we kind of see it later on where it kind of backfires a little bit then as well. That when you kind of set that and you set your feet a little bit, that if they can get around that first shot that you're going to counter with, you may be in trouble and almost kind of stuck in no man's land for a particular second or two. So we might see some examples of that as we go on.
Yeah, well, I was very impressed with Davide's response. So immediately following this little clip where he's just had the sidekick scored against him, he does respond, really quite well, getting to hands and then putting a little bit of pressure on, capitalising on that missed spin. And I do think that's exactly what you were saying, where Carl has looked for a particular shot and then he's improvising from there. And, it's looking for that one-shot direct counter. And, you could even say, yeah, Davide is not scoring on that blitz,
Yeah.
Carl potentially even gets a score on the way back with a fairly clean punch just there with the left hand on the way back. But it changes the tempo of the match. It's the first time that Davide really kind of gets ahead of himself on the tempo and is deciding where the match is going and at what pace it's happening. And that's not what the counter fighter wants. And
No, yeah. I'm very impressed as well here by Davide's like the psychological aspect of he almost got planted very early on, coming with hands, and Carl almost set down a marker. But yet he's focused on his job. He knows what his task is. He knows what his go-to shots are, and no matter what happens, that's his job. He's focused on it, and he's not worried about what's already after happening in the round. He's very much present there in his thoughts, and he's going for what he sees there and then. And I think that's a sign of a very strong psychological fighter, a very strong mental strength there to be able to just take those shots on the chin earlier on, but still continue forward with the focus and the intentions that he does have.
Yeah, it's backing yourself to be good enough, that what you've done and what you've prepared is going to be good enough, and that you just have to, psychologically back yourself to do the job. Right after this, we had some of Davide's, his first clear score. And it's one right out of the 1990s to early 2000s playbook, back in the day when you could get 2 points each for the jumping punches. So I mean, at this stage it's 1 point each, but it's very hard to argue that both of those don't land pretty clearly. And and that's one for all four judges to have a good look at.
Definitely, it's a little bit scrappy. I think that, based on Carl's style in particular, I think that it would very much suit him here to use that as a setup, like a feint that we seen earlier, to set up another shot. So maybe like a back leg turning kick or back kick, maybe, or just settle, leave Davide come and walk him into a side kick like we seen earlier. So I think that might have been the initial intentions, but I think it's very noteworthy as well to notice that he's probably just backed into a corner here and feeling the pressure and he just feels that he needs to relieve that pressure a little bit because he's probably getting a little bit too, I guess, claustrophobic. Like myself in particular as well, I would like that space when I'm countering. That's something that a counter fighter would love, to be in control of the tempo and to be in control of the range. So obviously Davide is just getting a bit uncomfortably too close there, and it just draws a reaction out of Carl to almost go for that one.
Yeah,
and then Davide just jumps over.
I was going to say, just for human nature, there's a tendency, if a pattern starts to repeat itself, you want to break the pattern. And
Yeah.
in this case, Davide is pushed, and Carl has conceded space through that same corner. And once the pattern has established itself a couple of times, it's kind of like the onus comes on to Carl then to be the one to break the rhythm, and to change the pattern. And he's gone with something that, it could work. And I just think as as he steps into this potentially blitz, kind of puts the brakes on, the front foot comes down heavy, kind of puts the brakes on, and it gives Davide the option. Like, we'd be half expecting Davide to be conceding ground with a side kick here, and he just gets tall. He goes up there, he makes a very clear score. And unlike the side kicks that we saw, which were such nice shots from Carl earlier, the value of the score is different. So that side kick worth 2 points, if it's only seen by 2 judges, is only getting you ahead on 2 cards. But those 2 punches in the air that potentially all the judges can see, that's 2 points on each of the cards. That's huge. That's big swing kind of stuff. And I think, Carl's a very intelligent fighter, and I think he'll, like, even though the scoreboard isn't live, he'll have a good tally, and he'll know like that actually is significant, And when we get to the biggest swing moment of the match, and this is the one that everybody in the stands will understand intuitively.
Yeah.
This is the one you're
That's
grabbing
one
up
that gets the crowd going. Yeah, it's quite straightforward here. And as you said, it goes back to that point we made earlier about the psychological aspect of Davide going for that. Like, that's the exact same shot he got planted with earlier on in the first round. But I think there's just a few points worth mentioning here, especially on the setup of it and things like that. When we go back here, we'll see some little small details that really impact it. So see, front position of the hand here of Davide is quite low. So that almost like gives a false sense of security of the distance, I think, which is very clever from Davide. But when we see it again, you'll actually notice how close his front foot is. So when it rolls around again, we'll see it here. But his front foot is very, very close to Carl. See how close it is? But yet, because his upper body looks like a little bit further away, it almost gives Carl like a false insecurity. Okay, that's not really on. But it's a nice little ploy by Davide to set that up, and he's able to go from very low at that front hand to directly forwards. And I think that's very, very important. Like, usually we would tell people to carry their front hand a little higher to set up the hands. But I think the way he's able to bring it straight up and directly forward is very, very useful to get Carl on the back foot from the get-go. And then you see small little steps here, a little quick change of the feet. And as he lands his left hand, just as that left hand is pulling away, the left leg comes up very nicely, and it's almost blinding by that left hand. So it's very hard for you to see that coming. And it's a great shot by Davide.
Yeah, and there's a few fighters that we've seen down the years do that particularly well. I mean, Zach Espy's the one that always jumps to my mind as well, and again with the left leg. But he connects the legs and hands so fluidly that the rhythm doesn't give away that the shot is coming, and it's just there. And sometimes it'll be over your blindside shoulder, like Carl's in motion there, and Carl's trying to stay active with the hands. So it's very, very hard to see, and the incentive is with the fighter going forward to get that shot there, and he does just throw it. But that doesn't work if Carl can get his feet down. And he's almost looked to do what Davide did with the jumping punches. He's got tall as Davide's come in there, and that lifts him up in his toes, so that as the blitz comes in there, there's no way he can actually stand and get the feet down or change direction. He's going along for the ride. So then it's just on Davide to finish it out.
Yeah, and I think, you know what, that's actually it's a very advanced technique from Davide, because usually if Carl was against anybody else in this left versus right stance, he would get away with that, because usually when you're for Davide attacking, he's going to be very much side facing as he comes through because of the stance difference. But you can see his front foot is sideways here now, but as he attacks, see the change of that little quick step to change the direction of his front foot, which opens up his body for him to get him directly forwards. So I think if that was in the opposite stance and somebody who wasn't as advanced, I think that Carl actually would have ended up being on top from that sequence. But Davide was just very, very good at this shot, and he was able to understand the body mechanics that is necessary to get this off, and then able to blindly hide that back leg turning kick to the head for a nice visible 3 points.
Yeah, and I think this is one as well that has a huge momentum swing in it, that you'd often see it, the basketball term kind of makes sense is, when you get the 2-pointers and the free throw as well, so, you get your score and the bonus one. Because, Davide would be completely forgiven for taking this shot, scoring his 3 points, and then just putting up the front leg as a fence and saying, no, you stay there, Carl. I'm happy with that. Let's make sure the judges have time to write it down. but he goes straight back in again with that with a blitz right after that, and that little bit of added momentum and pressure, Carl just flinches a little bit, and it's he just leans into Davide, and it's given his holding, and you can see here, like, it's not like the hands touch behind the back, but it's given his holding, and so now you've got a 3-point swing that probably 3 out of 4, if not 4 out of 4 judges are giving that 3-pointer. Then
Yeah.
4 out of 4 judges have to give that minus point. And then what's going to happen as well is between the two shots, he's still in that corner. And Davide is able to build on that again and force another couple of warnings. And the warnings become very important in this match. And well, we can't say how important because we don't see the scoreboard, but we know that Carl gets to 8 warnings. And you're at minus 2 points and a third one for the foul. It's going to matter quite a lot.
Yeah. Definitely, and I think that it's very good here from Davide because, as we mentioned with that psychological thing earlier, he knows like he's going to the well with that shot, and that's what he's going to no matter what happens. And I think it's a combination of that and the fact that he noticed as well that Carl's helmet was a little bit twisted, and he just, like the fighter that he is, he just instinctively bid on that and just went for it, and he knew that he had a little bit of an opportunity there to go for something. So with the twisted helmet, obviously Carl wasn't exactly settled for a split second, which gave Davide that opportunity to rush forward. Helmet's twisted, you can't visibly see too well, and obviously that might result in a little bit of holding as a result. So very, very big switch of momentum there from Davide, and really well done.
And speaking of going back to the well, we see him go for the exact same shot later on, but it doesn't quite work. Carl has the right leg in front in this case. He's able to go blindside and just stay out of harm's way for the most part. But it does show. Very often a fighter will develop a combination, a fluidity around a particular set of moves that once you have it and once you know it's been working for you, and it has been in this case for Davide for the previous couple of years, like he scored plenty of those turning kicks to the head. Sometimes that's an option for Carl there at that stage, because when the headshot lands, there's still 60 seconds left in this fight, and one of the things that could be done, and Carl is really good at, is offer that shot. So he's, here it almost works, where he's almost offered Davide the shot, let him take it, and then as a counter fighter, you know exactly what's coming at you. And that's what a counter fighter wants. They want to know which from their bag of counters is the right choice, and then they just set their feet, they set their mentality, and they can pick that shot off. And I mean, it doesn't quite work there. Davide's got the initiative on it, but that is something that we might actually encourage a counter fighter to do. Whether you're winning or you're losing, if the incentive is on the other person and they want to move, well, give them exactly what they want, because yes, it's exactly what they want, but now you know what they're throwing.
Yeah, lure him into it, exactly. But I have to say as well, the adaptability from Carl here is very good, not to actually concede that headshot again. He almost learned his lesson from just a few sequences previous, where he kind of went off the other direction, where he would have gave off a warning. So he pulls a nice angle here, which is very good. He's able to just slip off that. So the adaptability there from him is excellent. But I think it's interesting to note as well the difference there between the very, very first clip we seen, where Carl lands a lovely backhand and puts Davide on his back almost, versus this one here. So the difference in that shot versus the one where Davide lands the head kick that we've seen on the edge, and then the very last clip that we've seen as well. So it's interesting to see how the sequences are very, very similar, but the results are a little bit different. So I think that's an interesting thing to note there. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the planting of the feet and just being a little bit more comfortable as a counter fighter. As I mentioned earlier, counter fighters want the fight to be in their tempo and their rhythm. And I think Davide did a fantastic job of maybe swinging that factor into his favor, where the tempo, pressure, momentum is kind of on his side based on the pressure and focus he's bringing to Carl.
Yeah. So maybe one of the final points to look at today, I mean, just looking at it from a pure score analysis in that match, at the point in the match where Carl has landed the second side kick, I think at that point in time he's ahead by 4 points. He's probably got 3 warnings already, so he's ahead by about 4 points on 2 scorecards. So it's looking really, really, really clear. But you've got 2 scorecards that are level, and if you're in a position where you're looking at that, it's like, I need 1 point on those cards to make a draw, and at that point, that's where that the second side kick lands, and Davide makes his response. He comes back in with a jab and then into a blitz, and they don't really score. But then soon after that, he gets his jumping punches, and I think at that point, once that lets him get scores on those other two scorecards, and we get a level match. So I think when you're in that position, I do think that the fighters won't be completely aware of exactly where it is, but they'll have some sense of it. So when that big momentum shift happens and the headshot lands, I think Carl's very, very aware there that he has work to do, and we see the pattern of the fighters completely change. But one of the things that may have kind of hurt Carl or put him in that position, and which normally Carl has such a high score rate, it doesn't matter. But but the number of warnings he's conceded throughout the match is actually a little bit of a problem for him in this one. And it might be worth just looking at the kind of the positioning that he's ended up in that led to the warnings. So I think I can pull up just a few quick ones here, and we can have a look at those.
Yeah, and you know what? I completely understand how this happens. As I mentioned earlier, naturally, as a counter fighter, you kind of want to have that security in terms of the tempo and space we talked about. So naturally, you're going to have to concede a little bit of a match space to get that off and to have that, to get your way there in terms of the countering. So that will naturally draw you a little bit more towards the edges, and that's usually a natural thing that happens when you're trying to counter like that. Especially these guys are quite tall. Both of these guys will be over 6 foot, so a lot of movement here is going to result in a mat technique really, which doesn't leave you with a lot of space when you're conceding space consistently.
Well, that's it. And I think it's one of those things where if your counters are being successful, if you are getting your nice clean scores, as Carl very often does, it doesn't matter if you've conceded a few more warnings. And in particular, if you're doing it in the various corners and sides of the ring where more judges can see what's going on. But in the pattern that's emerged in this match, Carl has scored his two side kicks where they were most visible, I think, to the judges on the near side. So judges 1 and 2, say from our perspective, left and right at the front of the screen, I think they've seen most of Carl's early scores. And I think the issue is, although Davide doesn't get a lot of scores throughout the match, he does get those jumping punches and that headshot, and they're high value scores. They're to the head, they're visible from all sides. And I think himself then, he concedes he has the foul later on, but other than that, he's only conceding the 1 warning. And with him being that low scoring overall, I think if he was having the same difficulties or conceding the warnings as well, all of a sudden this match is level again.
Yeah, I think that's the difference. The difference that Davide's headshot foul that he got Carl for holding, that was on all 4 judges, like you mentioned, whereas Carl's nice clear shots were only clear to 50% of the judges, which makes a massive difference in the overall result. So I think that's something to take away from that it's very, very difficult to set this up, but if possible, you want your techniques to be as clear to all 4 judges as possible. And one of the ways you can make that happen is by not pushing yourself to the corner. So the more you are in the center without you being squeezed into a particular space, the more options and more possibility there is for your technique to land for all 4 judges quite clearly.
So if we take that as a kind of a general principle, as a takeaway from this video then, is there any kind of things that you can think of that you might do with your students training their sparring to give them a better natural understanding of the relative value of those scores?
Yeah, I think a nice place to start would be to help them make decisions before the last mat. I think that if you're in the last mat of the square, I think if you're making decisions on that area, I think it's the wrong place to do it. I think you need to be a little bit more proactive in your decisions to not leave the person squeeze that space, which is going to result in them getting more and more of an advantage every little bit of space they squeeze out of you. So I think that's a great place to start. And also one thing that I would like to take from this as well is the whole idea of, like we mentioned earlier, with the psychological aspect of when Davide, he knew that was his go-to shot. Even though it didn't work out the first time, he never abandoned it. And I think there's a fine balance there as well, because you want to be able to adapt on the fly. These are quite short rounds, 2 minutes. So if something's not working consistently, you got to very quickly adapt and change that up, or you're going to lose. But I think that he did really well of being able to make that work for him. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
Cool. So I suppose, yeah, for me, what I was actually thinking in my head is, whenever we're doing our constrained spars or our conditioned spars, one of the things that we could play with is shifting the points values of the scores that we're giving. So maybe to reflect a little bit more the value of the score. So maybe we start limiting the side kicks to a single point score. We start having, a clear single punch to the head, particularly, or a headshot as maybe a punch to the head is a 2-point score, and a headshot with the 40 is a 5-point score, just for your training rounds. And what that will naturally do, I think, for people is create a little bit of a better understanding in their head of what a particular shot is worth. And I mean, we often see it where you have an inflexible fighter, just how little they can rely on getting big scores off the legs, and they need those extra scores.
It's a great point.
Hands, just to make clear scores.
I think actually what has a lot to do with that is posture. It's just a thought that has come to my head now. I don't know how relevant posture will be to getting clear scores. It would be interesting to have a little bit of analysis on that and to see any big score that's put up on 4 judges' scorecards. I would imagine a lot of the time that the attacker's posture will be quite tall and strong in terms of the visual aspect of that.
Yeah.
So I think that might be actually interesting to have a look at as well. Particularly, I noticed that we did a video on Zach Espy before, and that was a big feature. His posture was quite tall a lot, which set him up for very clean scores.
Yeah.
And we've seen it a little bit here as well in some shots in the video we just did here. So I think that might be an interesting little thing to take a look at.
Definitely. We might do a little bit of a cross comparison, have a look at those karate guys, because that's a part of the scoring criteria for those guys. They have to
interesting.
They have extra scoring criteria around, the execution of the technique. It has to be the correct technique. It has to have the vigorous intent, and it has to have, be executed within a particular distance of the target. So, all of that makes it very clean looking when there's a score. So, but I do wonder if, just from a very simple point of view, like we were saying there, giving scores that judges can see and score easily is a part of our game.
Yeah, it makes your job easier, doesn't it? And if you make the judge's job easier, I'm sure they'll reward you for that. So
exactly,
that's the aim of the game.
So do you want to wrap up for us, Richie?
Yeah, so there's lots of takeaways from this one, as we've seen there. So it's been a nice video to almost have a little bit of analysis on and take away some learning points. So I hope everybody that made it this far took something of value from that. So if you have, be sure and give the video a like. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe, because there'll be plenty of more videos coming your way. So yeah, as always, if you have any comments or suggestions, make sure and drop them down below. And I think, just as we mentioned there on the posture and how that relates to very clear scores on the judges, maybe you can share your opinion on that below in the comments. So drop it down below on your opinion of how you think people's posture and how tall they are with landing shots impacts the visibility and how clear scores become for judges. So maybe that might be an interesting little topic that we can discuss in the comment box. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, and all the other places. We have some content up there daily, most days at least. And be sure to check out our next video. So we'll have a video next week on Friday again for our Fight Chat Friday series. And hopefully we'll have some videos during the midweek in the meantime.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richie.